Dr. Cowie is joined by our panelists who include William M. Daley, Vice Chairman, JPMorgan Chase, and former United States Secretary of Commerce. Scott Price, CEO, Walmart Asia. Rajan Mittal, President, Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Robert Atkinson, President, the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And the rapporteur is Pierce Scranton, Vice President, Global Government Relations, JPMorgan Chase. And now, Dr. Cowie.
Good morning, everybody. In the last panel, we heard from a group of distinguished ministers lead us through some of the questions about how we can expand trade and investments and offering their perspectives in a sense, being the Sherpas of government interests in this area. But as they all said, it is going to take the dynamic involvement of the business sector for further progress to be made in integrating and expanding services markets globally, and this panel is really addressing that perspective. I think that there are some things that we heard in the last panel that are important for the future of these negotiations and for the business sector as a whole. One thing that we heard about in the last panel that I hope that we'll explore here is about the important message that services are a growth multiplier for other parts of the world economy. Important in themselves and just as important in the way that they expand the growth of other parts of the economy. For example, in manufactured goods, the growth in manufactured goods is increasingly depending on the growth in services. That is, services actually create the markets and the demand that generates innovations in the hardware markets themselves. The perfect example of this is the iPad, which a large number of you have, and which, despite all of its business applications, has as its secret pleasure, at least for your kids when they grab the iPad, the use of Facebook and YouTube in a really cool way, right? And that is a driver of demand for a whole new way of handling computing devices. A second factor that I think is important from the perspective of what the private sector can add to the government dialogue is that in the long term, all international agreements among governments are imperfect instruments. They can only do things so right because the world is complex and there are disparity of interests. But if international agreements can fundamentally help set it up so it's easier to follow the right side of a rising curve of economic potential, then they've done their job. And this is certainly an industry in the services sector that is on the right side of the growth curve. We've heard a lot about how services today are much more prominent than they were at the start of the Doha round. But it's equally important to remember that services, in a sense, are only beginning to expand their full potential on the way that we organize and run our societies productively. If you want an everyday example of this, think about the fact that location used to be based upon maps, and we had a map industry, right? Today we have GPS, which is creating a world in which everyone has a map, and instead of the map being used when you're lost, at least if you're a guy, in the middle of the trip, it's now a preemptive value that helps guide decision making because it's ubiquitous and there. If you think about agriculture, GPS for agriculture implies a whole revolution in how agriculture will be done in its interaction with energy and environmental issues. There are whole new systems of plowing fields that come from the fact you don't have to till a field with broad furrows any longer. You can follow a single narrow line of plowing. And why is that? Because a small tractor has a GPS on it, and you can exactly repeat the line of the plowing on a narrow plot course. And thus it changes the whole pattern of agriculture. So we are on the fundamental right side of a transformation, not at the maturing of it, but really at the beginning of its potential. The final point that emerged in the first section is that if business is not convinced that this is important, it won't happen. And so, in a sense, today, we have a group of leaders who can help us understand where both the potential is and where the passion is, where and what things will make them become truly engaged in helping us come to the final rounds of liberalization. We're lucky to have with us a person who has been a leader in both government and industry, in Secretary Daley. And so I thought I'd start our conversation by asking him, as somebody who's had to figure out the ways of making things happen in both the public and private sector, if leaders today in governments have to do 2 or 3 things in setting priorities to get the next stage of liberalization done, where should they place their bets?
Sounds like a question I was asked in Seattle about 10 years ago. One nice thing, let me just thank the organizers for inviting me. It's been a while, and I see a lot of faces that I haven't seen in a long time, still dealing with a lot of the fundamental questions. Listening to the end of the first panel, a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the comments are very similar from what we heard quite a long time ago. I think there's a couple of things that fundamentally right now, we are, no question about it, at a very difficult point for liberalization, for those who have the nerve to stand up, other than in a room like this, and talk about the need for liberalization in the political system of this country and in most of the world through these difficult times. But I think that 2 things have to be done. Those of us who have been at this for a little while, and those who have spent their lifetime in trying to move the agenda of liberalization and trade. There's 3 things I think that have to happen immediately. One, we have to be much more positive about where we're at in the world. I think we oftentimes get caught up in our own negativity about Doha isn't happening, therefore, oh my God, is everything come to a grinding halt? I think that's a constant mistake by all of us. There is progress being made in other areas. I think we heard Rajan this morning as it was related to me to be very positive. I think we ought to be more positive about, obviously, the impact of liberalization. And we have not been able to fundamentally change the people of the world's opinion about this new world we're in. It happens, and in the service area, I mean, you mentioned, Peter, GPS, but when you look at all the businesses that are represented here, many of the businesses out there, we're moving with services around the world, applications, changes in the way we do our business, with or without some of the government's approval. And they're just happening. And innovation and creativity is what will drive this liberalization, not the political system. And so sometimes we get hung up on our own inability to get a major deal done, and we're looking at the trees instead of the forest, which is not as bad as I think some of us sometimes talk from this sort of setting.
If you were helping to simplify the forest that you have to steer through, are there 1 or 2 thickets that you wish were raised in order to make innovation easier?
I think if we could ease the movement of people in the world, especially that's become a major problem as a result of security needs in our country especially. But I think that with that movement instills an innovativeness that can be replicated around the world. So I think that's important to try to do that. And I think those of us, again, just get more positive in our discussions with government. Try to push government, those major businesses that are here, continue to do what we've done. But I would say that would be a major step if we could engage governments to try to find a way to ease that, despite the security concerns.
So we're also fortunate to have one of the distinguished leaders in the services industry in India, Mr. Mittal, with us. You've built a world-class telecom group in India, and India is also at the forefront of many of these new expanding applications that are coming as much from the emerging economies as the wealthy countries, such as mobile banking. Perhaps from your viewpoint, you could tell us a little about, as an expanding company